Hello and welcome to the ProLongevity podcast. I'm Graham Phillips. And welcome to this, the final episode with world-leading Professor Robert Lustig. In this, our final episode, we discuss type 2 diabetes, baby food, and the need for health regulation of the food industry. Now sit back, enjoy, and do let us know what you thought in the reviews below. So you've kind of touched on this. We've touched on why a calorie isn't a calorie, but another thing that I've heard you, certain things that you've said over time has really struck me. And another thing that you've said is that type 2 diabetes shouldn't be called type 2 diabetes. We should call it processed food disease.
Indeed.
And of course, I completely agree, but explain that.
Well, I mean, if you take a look at the data, I mean, you just look at the data. Ultimately, you know, the people think that type 2 diabetes is because you eat too much, except there are a whole bunch of people who are massively obese who don't have type 2 diabetes. And there are a whole bunch of people who are perfectly thin who have type 2 diabetes. So that's not working. I mean, that's not the determining factor.
Yeah.
What we've shown is that there are three fat depots. Three. Subcutaneous, or big butt fat. Visceral, or big belly fat. And finally, big liver fat.
Yeah.
Those are your three fat depots. Now, let's take the subcutaneous fat first. You have to gain about 10 kilos before your subcutaneous fat will make you sick, before you can start seeing metabolic dysfunction on the basis of subcutaneous fat. 10 kilos, 22 pounds.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, it's true, you can get sick from adding fat to your subcutaneous compartment. I don't argue that. Well, it takes 10 kilos. Why so much? And the answer is because the subcutaneous fat drains into the systemic circulation. It drains into the inferior vena cava, which means that any cytokines or any poisons, any bad proteins that your fat cells make are going to be diluted by your entire blood volume. All right. So you have to have a whole lot of fat to get a high enough concentration to be able to affect other parts of your body, like, for instance, your liver or your brain. All right. Because you have 6 liters of distribution in terms of your blood volume, yeah, and also another 40% of your weight in terms of the interstitial fluid. So, you gotta have a whole lot of fat in your sub-Q compartment to get there. Now let's take the second compartment, visceral fat, big belly fat. Yeah. Turns out you only need about 2 to 3 kilos of belly fat before you start seeing that. Now, why is the sub-Q fat 10 kilos and the belly fat only 2 to 3 kilos? And the answer is because the belly fat drains into the portal vein, doesn't drain into the inferior vena cava. Anatomically, okay, this is what's known as a portal system.
Yeah.
All right. Now, what is a portal system for your audience? Okay, it's where the blood goes through 2 organs to get back to the heart, as opposed to 1 organ.
Yeah.
Normally, blood goes aorta, artery, organ, vein, vena cava, heart.
Yeah.
In a portal system, it goes aorta, artery, organ 1, vein 1, organ 2, vein 2, vena cava, heart. Okay, 2 organs. And there are only 2 places in the body where there's a portal system. One is hypothalamus and pituitary. And the reason is because the pituitary has to be able to see minute quantities of the hypothalamic releasing factors. And if they got diluted through the entire blood volume, they could never see them.
Yeah.
So that's one portal system. And the other is pancreas, liver.
Yeah.
So insulin drains into the portal vein because the liver is the primary target of insulin action, and visceral fat drains into the portal vein to affect the liver negatively. And so only a little visceral fat will cause your liver to become dysfunctional, 2 to 3 kilos, as opposed to 10 kilos. And then finally, there's number 3. liver fat. And you only need about half a kilo of liver fat to be able to cause your liver to be dysfunctional, because it's right there. It's causing your liver to be dysfunctional, at really minute quantities. Now, do you think you can see a half a kilo of liver fat on the scale?
That's the point, isn't it? Absolutely. You can't.
You can't see it.
Yeah.
All right. And that's why thin people are sick.
Yeah.
And they don't know why.
Yeah.
Because they're thin.
Yeah.
Because they're fat. They have fat in their liver. Okay. And of course, the famous ones are the alcoholics. But now we know that sugar makes liver fat just as well as alcohol does. In fact, my colleague Rick Johnson just published a paper that showed that alcohol actually damages the liver because because it raises the fructose level in the liver. It's actually the fructose that's damaging the liver, not the alcohol. How about that? All right, paper just came out. So ultimately, what happens at the liver determines how sick you are. And sugar, because it's metabolized directly in the liver and gets turned into fat in the liver through this process called de novo lipogenesis, new fat making. Yeah. That's where the action is. The action's in the liver, and the goal is protect the liver. Protect the liver, feed the gut. So protect the liver from the onslaught of sugar, branched chain amino acids, glyphosate, heavy metals, and feed the gut. And feed the gut what? Well, feed the gut fiber, because that's what it eats. Yeah. Fiber is food for your bacteria. It's not food for you. Yeah. Okay. So protect the liver, feed the gut. Any food that does both is healthy. Any food that does neither is poison. Any food that does one or the other but not both is somewhere in the middle. And the empiric data on any given food and its role in chronic disease actually fits that paradigm. And so that's what I present in the book, Metabolical, is how to think about food having nothing to do with calories, because calories are a red herring.
Yeah. No, beautifully put. I mean, I love the way. I mean, it's fairly. I've read lots of books, right? Lots in this area, and it's very rare that every time I read a book, I learn something. What was so stunning about your book was how you brought all these things together, and I kind of understood all of it, but the way that you bring it all together in a very holistic way, and you tell about the story of the metabolism, and you tell the history of the whole thing. It's really it's a stunning book.
Well, thank you.
I absolutely loved it. So we've kind of established that processed food isn't food, and we've established from a sort of molecular basis why it's not really food. Right. And there's so much else in the book. I mean, we could be here for many hours, which you certainly haven't got the time, I'm quite sure. So I'm just going to pick out one or two specific things that I think don't get asked a lot. One in particular was about baby food. Yeah. Because my kids are now producing kids. And so I'm starting to look at the baby food that I sell and scream in frustration.
Indeed.
What's your take on baby food?
Yeah, well, there's baby food and then there's baby poison. That's what it comes down to. So baby food is a relatively new invention. Yeah. The very first baby food that was commercially available was in the Netherlands in 1901. There was no baby food before 1901. That was the very first, time that there was, a baby food you could buy. How did people feed their babies before that? We had several hundred thousands of years of, feeding babies and children before there was baby food. How'd they do it? Okay. There was no breakfast cereal. There was no, pureed, baby, stuff you squirt in the kid's mouth. Yeah. There was no, here comes the choo-choo, none of that. So how'd we do it? And why didn't we all die? And the answer is, we did what the birds did. The birds, the mother bird would pre-masticate pieces of food that she would find and she would then drop it in the baby's mouth, and the baby would gum it to death. Now, we don't do that anymore. Well, one, it's kind of semi-disgusting, and number two, germs and whatever. And number three, we're all worried that the baby's going to choke. Garbage. The baby's not going to choke. In fact, if you look at the number of choking cases, okay, before and after, it did not change. Okay, and I looked. So it's not that we're choking. The baby food industry convinced us that we would choke. They created a disease that wasn't there, that their baby food was going to solve. And so what they did was they pureed it. And when they pureed it, they could put anything in it that they wanted. When they put a lot of sugar in it, because then the baby would like it. Yeah. Right. So how many times do you have to introduce a savory food to an infant before they will accept it? Median of 13. Yeah. How many times do you have to introduce a sweet food to an infant before they will accept it?
Well, I remember my youngest son, Robert, the first time we gave him ice cream. And the look on his face, first of all, he licked it. It was cold. He went, "Bleh." And then he went, and he was hooked. So the answer is once.
Oh, Michael Pollan writes about this in, the Botany of Desire, the first time he gave his kid sugar, and all of a sudden, it's like the kid's eyes widen open again. Like, you've been holding out on me. It's in the world. I'm going to devote my entire life to this. And he did. Yep. So this is a well-known, well-worn phenomenon for all parents, when they first give their kids sugar. Why babies love sugar, I can't tell you why. They do. Their taste receptors, are very prone to and have a predilection for sugar, for sweet. And the point is that it's probably the single worst thing we can be doing for them. Yeah. In fact, the American Heart Association has now said that the amount of added sugar we should be giving to toddlers and infants, below the age of 2 is 0 teaspoons. 0. I'm for that. Point is, that's not what the processed food, baby food industry is selling. Yeah. And it's not and just they no added sugar on it, but they, apple puree or whatever else, and bottom line is there are a lot of things that double for that. And not just the sugar, it's all the seed oils that are in there as well. So it's every type of poison. Well, and now there's heavy metals, here, the FDA, there's this big, conglomeration around this issue of heavy metals in baby food. That the FDA sort of gave a pass on, and it's created several lawsuits here in the US. So this question of baby food is, shall we say, a hot potato right at this very moment. And I think that, what we've done to babies is why we have, obese 6-month-olds. Now, we also have obese newborns before they are even out. They're already obese. So like, what's that about? They don't eat, except they did. Except, well, they didn't eat, the baby food, but they ate mother's food through the placenta. Yeah. And it was always said that sugar doesn't cross the placenta because the placenta doesn't have the GLUT5 transporter, which is specific for fructose. That's true, it doesn't. It has the GLUT7, 9, and 11 transporters, which transport fructose just fine. Okay, they're just not exclusive. Yeah. So it turns out that fructose does cross the placenta, does get into the baby, and has very specific effects on placental function and liver enzyme development, and it's a developmental programming issue. And it basically tells the liver, make more fat now, and they keep doing it. So we actually get babies in trouble before they're even born by what mother consumed. Yeah. So there's a lot of problems. So if it's not just the baby food, I mean, it's what the mother eats before the mother, when the mother's even pregnant. Well, if you're going to fix that, then you got to fix the whole, the whole thing, the whole food system. So, which brings me, it's pretty much my last question.
It's one thing I learned from your book. I'd always understood that the sugar industry had learned from the smoking industry playbook.
Yep.
And
Oh,
one
no,
thing
it's
that
the other
you
way
taught me,
around.
it's the other way around,
The other way around.
which
That's right.
I never knew that. I never knew
Yeah.
that till reading your book. So that's another
Well, I
thing
didn't
I've
know it
learned.
either. I
Yeah.
didn't know it either until my colleagues here at UCSF, Kristen Carnes, Laura Schmidt, and Stan Glantz, we call ourselves affectionately the Sugar Hill Gang, actually discovered the treasure trove of documents from the Great Western Sugar Company, a company that went defunct in the mid-1970s in Colorado. And they found the documents from this company that had been willed to various libraries around the state of Colorado, and started piecing the information back together again and showing that basically the sugar industry knew exactly what they were doing. And they have put their thumb on the scale in so many different ways. I just talked with Kristen yesterday, and she's working on a project right now that shows that the sugar industry actually changed the recommended daily allowances of all the vitamins to allow for processed food to basically, be considered, quote, healthy, unquote, back in the 1940s. So there's a long history of food industry subterfuge.
Yeah, it's absolutely disgraceful. So I don't know if you're going to agree with me about this one. I firmly believe that some of the best things that ever happened was seatbelts and the compulsory introduction of seatbelts, and the way that the smoking industry has been increasingly demonized. And now we're seeing smoking rates come down from 80% to somewhere below 15%. Right. Do you agree with me that the food industry should be regulated in the same way for the same reasons?
Absolutely. So, ultimately, this is a cultural moment. All right. Now, we have had four cultural tectonic shifts in the last 30 years. And you've just mentioned one of them. Okay. Bicycle helmets and seatbelts, smoking in public places, drunk driving, condoms in bathrooms. Okay. 30 years ago, if a legislator stood up in State House or Congress or Parliament or anywhere else on the planet and had proposed legislation for any one of those four, they'd have gotten laughed right out of town. Nanny state, liberty interest, get out of my kitchen, get out of my bathroom, get out of my car. Okay, this is none of your business. Right? Today, they're all facts of life.
Yep.
No one's belly aching about any of those. And if you pull out of your driveway and you don't have your seatbelt clicked, your kids will scream at you. Believe me, I've tried.
Yeah.
I scream at you. So how'd that happen? And why did it take 30 years? Answer, we taught the children. The children grew up and they voted. And the naysayers are dead. Yeah. That's why it takes 30 years. This is a generational shift. All four of these were generational shifts. They didn't happen immediately. Okay, it took a while, but we teach the children, and then the children adopt these practices. Now we're seeing this with food. Now, okay, the children will change things when they get older. The question is, will we have a planet by then? That's a big question. That's a more existential question. Yeah. But ultimately, this problem will take care of itself. I would say we're about 8 to 9 years into this 30-year cycle. Okay, people are waking up. People are understanding this. Books like Metabolical and and other books that have come out to demonstrate what the problem really is. Okay, and we're starting to teach the children that just because it says it's food, it doesn't mean it's food. And they're starting to understand, and they're growing, gardens in elementary schools. And, we're actually teaching fourth graders, 10-year-olds, knife techniques so that they can actually implement the nutrition education that we're giving them, so that when they go into the store and the mother takes them, for produce shopping, and the kid says, there's an artichoke. Can we have that for dinner? And the mother says, I don't know how to make an artichoke. And the kid says, yeah, but I do. All right. Because the kid becomes the positive disruptive force in the house. to basically get the parents to do the right thing. So we got to teach the kids how to do that. We're starting to do that. So I think this problem will ultimately get solved in the same way these other things did, because these are societal problems. These are not personal responsibility problems. These are public health issues. Okay. And ultimately the society determines it. And we're getting there.
So I think that's a great note on which to end. What I've tried to do is I've not tried to cover the whole book because there's just too much in it. I mean, as I say, it's astonishing. This is a life's work. It really is. The depth.
There's definitely a cordon.
No, honestly, Robert, I've read your other books, but this is just different level. I think it's the completeness of the narrative, and you've packed so much in there. Not much more I can add. Are there any final thoughts or comments or takeaways that you'd like to leave us with?
Well, yeah, you can't solve a problem if you don't know what the problem is. That's what it comes down to, right? You have to work upstream of a problem to solve a problem, and you have to know what the problem is. So in the book, first sentence of the book, there's a wasp in your attic. What do? Kill the wasp or find the wasp's nest? Okay, you have to work upstream of a problem to solve a problem. Working downstream of the problem only solves the result of the problem. And that's what we've been doing in medicine and pharmacy and nutrition, et cetera, for the last 50 years. We've been solving the result of the problem. We haven't solved the problem. And ultimately, climate change is the same thing. We have to work upstream. And we're not doing that because working upstream is hard. But that's what we have to do. People have to understand that in order to be able to generate enough political will to be able to fix the problem. And so that's what I would, really, sort of leave your audience with. You have to understand the problem to fix it. And we don't.
So listen, Robert, you've been extremely generous with your time and articulate as ever. And it only remains to be really to thank you so much for being with us today. And I hope at some point we can talk again.
Absolutely. I hope in person next time.
Well, I was hoping to come to the Metabolics conference in Israel because I think you were one of the speakers there. So perhaps we can meet there at the next one.
Perhaps, yeah. Let's hope so. I hope, look, I have nothing would give me greater pleasure than to get on a plane and go to London right now. But, unfortunately, we got this virus that we're not solving either.
Yeah. Well, hopefully in the next, things will start to open up in the next year and we'll all be able to travel again.
Hope so.
All right, listen, you take care and thank you so much.
Thank you, Graham. Appreciate it.
Okay. Bye. Thank you for listening. And if you haven't already done so, look at the links below and you can follow Robert on social media. And before you leave, if you haven't already done so, please subscribe to our media channels. And that way you won't miss future episodes with people like Robert and our other amazing guests.